It is week 5 of the HBCU football season, and we are back in our HBCU Game Day studios for our HBCU football Friday night preview show. I am Symone Stanley, back in the seat with Wilton Jackson. Wilton, week 5, we have a lot of good matchups, a lot of teams coming off the bad side of upsets. You know, some teams coming off the bad side of blowouts, but a lot of teams rolling into this week feeling good. We're going to get into it. We have a lot of matchups to preview. How are you feeling this week?
I am feeling great, Symone. Anytime I get a chance to talk about football and to see your presence, I've been, talking to Tolly the last couple of weeks, and he was saying, Symone ditched me. I was like, man, I thought me and Symone was better than that.
Tolly gonna say anything to, throw some dirt on my name, spread a smear campaign. But y'all already know I'm glad to be back here with y'all. So let's go ahead and get into the matchup, starting out with Alabama State versus Bethune-Cookman. Bethune-Cookman had their heart snatched at the end of the game against Clark Atlanta University last week. Clark Atlanta red hot, just like their field. But Bethune-Cookman is gonna be looking to bounce back this week against the Hornets.
You're right, Symone. Both teams are seeking a win in SWAC play, and when you think about this is a Bethune-Cookman team, obviously, that could use a win. You're talking about, when you think about Bethune-Cookman, the keys to success for them would be obviously getting Cam Ransom going as quick as possible. They also would need to own the line of scrimmage and getting him involved in that, because you're talking about an Alabama State defense that's going to get after him very quickly. You're also talking about, finding a way to get Diaz in the offense, getting Diaz involved in the offense early, and especially beyond special teams. Like, he had a touchdown last week in the Wildcats offense early in that game, which was good. But after that, he didn't have any other major plays after that long touchdown reception. So I'm looking to see if he can get involved in that. And then also for Bethune-Cookman, making sure that they maintain that intensity for 60 minutes. I'm gonna be honest with you. When I was watching that game last week, after halftime, I said, oh, well, this is a wrap. Clark Atlanta's probably not going to come back. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking through Twitter and I'm seeing tweets like Clark Atlanta's still scoring. They're still scoring. I'm like, okay, Clark really might do this. And me and Talia just talked about what this win would mean for a Clark Atlanta team if they beat Bethune-Cookman. But I think that Bethune-Cookman, if they're looking to get a win this week against Alabama State, they're going to have to start early, and they're definitely going to have to get going with Ransom pretty soon.
A team that had no problem getting going early was the Grambling State Tigers. They pounced all over Jackson State last week with a statement win. This time, next up, they're going up against Prairie View, a big SWAC West game that could have playoff implications down the road.
You're right. This is a new, improved Grambling team that has, essentially been forcing turnovers left and right in its opponents, specifically with Jackson State last week and Texas A&M Commerce the week prior. And so you're looking at a Prairie View team. This is a pivotal point for Prairie View. You're talking about in the SWAC West alone, they've lost to Texas Southern. They lost to Southern. You're talking about if they lose to Grambling, this is a third SWAC West loss. This would not be good for them in terms of them trying to stay on track to win the SWAC West division. So here's some keys for Prairie View. Cameron Peters has to manage this game, and the Panthers' rushing attack must aid him in that process. Bubba McDowell has pretty much spoken, through each week in saying that Cameron Peters is the guy, but making sure that he plays within the role of what they need him to play and not doing too much. And in that case, being able to use their running backs in Connor Wisham and Lamaje McDowell, Scooter Adams to kind of help, offset some of his production that he may not give specifically from the passing game. And then also, that also opens up the idea of a quarterback like Peters to be able to get the ball to your wide receivers like Shamar Savage and Trajan Spiller, and also a player that needs to probably see more touches for Prairie View. Remember this name, Kobe Cavill? When he touches the ball, good things happen. They need to get him the ball. And also, more than anything, making sure that Prairie View controls the line of scrimmage, because you're talking about a Grambling team that when you talk about forcing turnovers and getting pressure, they got pressure on Cameron McCoy last week. They also got pressure on Jacoby and Morgan. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can do in that particular regard.
Our last SWAC matchup we're going to preview before we pivot to some other conferences, Jackson State versus Texas Southern University. Jackson State trying to get back in the win column. Same for Texas Southern this week.
You're right, Symone. Jackson State has won the last 9 matchups against Texas Southern, but I got to mention this. In those last 3 matchups, the game started off slow for Jackson State offensively before they picked up that intensity. But last year's game, Texas Southern had Jackson State on the ropes at home. So if I'm Jackson State, I'm looking to come in with a certain level of energy and tenacity, knowing that you're playing Texas Southern at home in their home field. And if you're Chris Dishman, you've already pretty much broke a record in beating Prairie in the beginning of the season. Why not try to break another one? So here's a couple keys for Jackson State. Cameron McCoy must stay healthy in this game. Honestly, I sound like a broken record sometimes, but it's like, obviously, there's always, Symone, we've watched Batman and Robin, and we know what that's like. Cameron McCoy has been Batman starting the game, but then Robin has to come in and Jacoby and Morgan. We need to see Cameron McCoy play an entire game. We just have to see it. Because every time you're not going to be able to play, Jacoby's not going to always be able to play Robin to Batman. And obviously we saw that last week. Not to say that, McCoy wants to get hurt, but at the same time, being able to strategically make sure that he stays in the game and knowing when to go after plays in the most aggressive way and knowing not to be so aggressive in some cases. Also with Jackson State, being able to establish a run, I think that's a no-brainer. They have the running backs to do that. Texas Southern is giving up nearly 180 yards on the ground, so that could be a bright spot for Jackson State. And also start fast, don't turn the ball over, and maintain the fundamentals on special teams. Slow starts hurt Jackson State all the time. And also they had some key uncharacteristic turnovers last week that I know TC Taylor, in terms of his coaching staff, they worked with the players to make sure that they would be prepared for this week. And when you're Texas Southern, they get KJ Cooper back at quarterback from injury. And then also making sure, if you're Texas Southern, getting pressure on either it's McCoy or Jacoby and Morgan, making sure you get consistent pressure on them and finding ways to own the line of scrimmage and stopping Jackson State's rushing attack.
That's going to be a good one. That's going to be a good matchup. Now, as we turn and look at the MEAC, it's still a lot of questions in the MEAC conference right now, especially dealing with the preseason favorites. Are the favorites still the favorites now that we're a few weeks into the season? Is it still Howard? Is it North Carolina Central? Let's go ahead and turn our eye to the MEAC. North Carolina Central University put a whooping on North Carolina A&T. That game
was not a game.
You hate to see the games like that because just as a fan, as a consumer, you know what I mean? Especially neither one of us got a skin in the game. Neither one of us are Eagle. Neither one of us are the Aggie. When it's a game like that, you want to see it competitive. You know what I mean? Right. That was hard to watch. So North Carolina Central is coming off of a big win against their rival, North Carolina A&T. They have Norfolk State University this week. Can you see them carrying it over that momentum?
I think they can. I think we'll get a much more competitive game this week, Symone, than what we saw last week, because last week, it was just hard to watch. But for North Carolina Central to keep that momentum, it's all going to start with Walker Harris. You're talking about a guy who's thrown for 660 yards, 5 touchdowns this season, and obviously North Carolina Central is averaging just over 31 points a game. But I think to be able to do that, they're going to have to be able to control the line of scrimmage against a strong front, against a strong defensive front from Norfolk State, because that's going to allow for Walker Harris to make the passes downfield, and it's also going to open the field up for, obviously, Jamari Taylor, their running back, to make plays. Also, for North Carolina Central to win this game, most people will probably remember what Dawson Odom said in that press conference after losing to FAMU. We can run the ball against anybody. Well, they pretty much shown in formidable opponents this year that they can run the ball against anyone. So, North Carolina Central, always have your eyes on Kavon King and Zavion Evans, because they're going to be looking to run the ball. That's what they do. They do that very, very well. If you're Norfolk State, you're hoping that your offensive line can control the line of scrimmage and get the ball and start running the ball immediately once the game starts. Also, you want to be able to get pressure on Walker Harris early and often. We saw Alabama State do it. We saw Elon do it. And we've seen, obviously, FBS North Carolina do it. So it can be done. And always, always, always keep your eyes on where Jamari Taylor is on the field at all times, because this is not just a running back who can run the ball, obviously. He can catch the ball out the backfield and make some dynamic plays, too.
All right. Now, we still have to talk about the Aggies. Shout out to the little fans that's still showing up after last week, okay? Shout out to y'all, for real. You got to hold your team down even when,
I feel like you're throwing shade a lot for this.
I'm saying, you know, I'm a 336. My dad went A&T. I'm from Greensboro. I'm always pull for the Aggies. You know what I'm saying? But like, I'm being dead serious. You still got to hold your team down. You know what I'm saying? You got to turn the page to next week. Just like that, the players on the field got to turn it to next week. You know, you still got to show up. Show up, fans. Keep showing up. But North Carolina A&T, they try to flip the script this week going up against South Carolina State. And Chennis Berry's big, bad Bulldogs. Now, if you were looking for an opponent to have a bounce back week against after North Carolina Central, I'm sure your eye would not be on Orangeburg, South Carolina. But
no.
You know, it's a new week. You got to flip the page. How can North Carolina A&T, you know, regain some respect this week against South Carolina State?
Sadly, Symone, I don't think this is the week they're going to do it. I just don't. And I know my North Carolina A&T fans are probably going to be very mad at me for saying that. In the comments
right now.
I know, but this is not the week that they're probably going to bounce back. And I'm going to tell you why. South Carolina State, this is the team, this is the sleeper team within the MEAC that most people have said, like, well, after North Carolina Central, after Howard, this is a team that could be competitive. South Carolina State, they have a really good team. And I think that the keys to success for them winning this game is obviously going to start in running the ball with DeAndre Duhart and KZ Adams. You're talking about two dynamic running backs that have shown that they can run the ball consistently. And with what we saw from North Carolina A&T last week, not necessarily stopping Jamar Taylor, I mean, if you didn't stop him, then what makes me think you're gonna stop DeAndre Duhart and KZ Adams? That's just my thought process. Also, then, too, making sure Eric Phoenix is able to get the ball down the field to his wide receivers. And you're talking about a South Carolina State offensive line that's strong. Lots of continuity between Nick Tace, Eric Brown, and Cam Johnson. If they're able to get the running game going, beware of what Eric Phoenix can do in terms of getting the ball to his receivers down the field. And also being able to, if you're South Carolina State, being able to stop the Aggies' rushing attack with Kenji Christian and Wesley Grace. But if you're also North Carolina A&T, you want to be able to start the run with both of those players I just named. Being able to convert on third downs. The Aggies have only been in the red zone maybe about 9 times this season in 4 games and only have 5 touchdowns in those opportunities. So that's why I say, like, it's been kind of hard to watch North Carolina A&T this season. But anything can happen. When you put players on the field, you put your 11, the other team's 11, anything can happen. We see it all the time. But I think for North Carolina A&T to get that rushing attack going pretty early, they're obviously going to have to get leverage on the offensive line against South Carolina State, which could be very hard because South Carolina State enters this game second in the MEAC in rush defense, allowing 126.3 yards per game.
Y'all hear that O-line? Wilton said they need you. You know what I'm saying? Step up. Prove shock the world on Saturday. Shock them. But let's go ahead and turn our eye to Georgia. Georgia, y'all know where we reside at HBCU Gameday. Atlanta, Georgia. We got some good football being played in the A right now. We have a whole Clark Atlanta University weekly coaches show with head coach Teddy Keaton and Sly the Sports Guy Williams. So we have plenty of in-depth coverage on what's going on with Clark Atlanta University. So we're not going to dive deep into that because Sly already doing that. But Clark Atlanta University is still undefeated right now. They're headed to Tennessee to play Lane College and the Dragons. So still got to shout out Clark, of course, because they're the hottest thing in the SIAC. But again, we have full weekly breakdowns with Clark. So let's talk about another matchup in the SIAC going down in Georgia this weekend. It's Fort Valley State University versus Savannah State. Savannah State just beat Tuskegee last weekend. Fort Valley State University coming to this matchup 1-2. They had a big win over Kentucky State University in week 2, but since then they've been trying to find some consistency.
No, they have, Symone, and this is a Fort Valley State team. You know, if you remember last year, this was a team that was in the thick of things when it came to the SIAC in terms of potentially playing for a championship. So you wonder, you come into this season thinking like, okay, this is a Fort Valley team that probably will still be aligned and in the mix when the season comes to an end. But now they're getting a Savannah State team that's coming off of a win against Tuskegee. And I wasn't sure before last week's game that I would have penciled in them beating Tuskegee, but they did. So that makes that game even much more interesting. Obviously, that game is going to be in Georgia. Fort Valley State plays well at home, so I like my chances with Fort Valley getting the win against Savannah State.
Yes, that could be the game of the week in Division II football and in the SIAC. We're going to keep our eye out on all the teams, of course. These are just some matchups to watch from us at HBCU Game Day, but of course, it's any given Saturday. All these matchups are going to be great. So if you didn't hear your team in the preview, that don't mean they not on our mind. That don't mean we ain't locked into the game. We still going to have all the coverage on HBCUGameday.com. So make sure you stay locked in. But this is Week 5 HBCU Football Friday night with Wilton Jackson and Symone Stanley. Thank you guys so much for joining us.